across many platforms will get a chance to hear. What I'm going to do is read some opening remarks that are going to frame the urgency of this moment, and then ask and introduce the witnesses and ask them to give their opening statements. My colleagues will be coming in and out today. As you can imagine, there's a lot going on here in Washington today, and a lot of issues we're dealing and grappling with. But again, there is none, in my opinion, that are not speaking as much to this urgency. There are none more important than what this could mean for American culture, Americans' economic strength, Americans' shared prosperity, and to affect the art that sustains so much of who we are as a people. So I'm going to jump in and just say again, thank you. What is at stake is clearly not just a corporate deal, but who controls news, who controls entertainment, who controls storytelling that's such a vital part of America. This forum we're having today is going to examine one of the largest proposed media mergers in U.S. history, one that will affect competition, jobs, creative independence in the entertainment industry, and the integrity and independence of the free press. Combining Paramount-Skydance with which already owns CBS News, Paramount Pictures, and Paramount Plus with Warner Bros, Discovery, CNN, HBO Max, DC Studios, Cartoon Network would place an extraordinary share of American news, entertainment, and storytelling under a single corporate umbrella. This is not just about corporate concentration and consolidation, it's about the concentration and consolidation of cultural power. And the track record of this kind of ownership is already clear. Within months of Skydance's August 2025 acquisition of Paramount, the CEO laid off approximately 2,000 employees, about 10% of the company's workforce, across CBS, MTV, BET, and other divisions. Approximately 1/4 of Paramount's senior vice presidents and above were terminated. These cuts came on top of a 15% workforce reduction under Paramount's prior leadership in 2024 and a further 3.5% reduction in June 2025, bringing total headcount from roughly 24,500 in 2022 to below 18,000 today. This is not more avenues for creators, as Paramount said 2 days ago. This is concentration of a film industry to just 4 remaining legacy studios, which means fewer projects will get greenlit, fewer of our stories will be told, fewer of our voices will be heard, fewer buyers for creative work, lower wages, cuts across this entire workforce, writers and actors, crews, drivers, production staff, and more. When companies merge, jobs don't just disappear. Jobs are eliminated and families are hurt and our economy suffers. On Monday, over 1,000 filmmakers, documentarians, and professionals across the movie and television industry wrote an open letter opposing this merger. They warned, and I quote from that letter, "Our industry is already under severe strain, in large part due to prior waves of consolidation. We have witnessed a steep decline in the number of films produced and released, alongside a narrowing of the kinds of stories that are financed and distributed. When companies merge, jobs disappear. Writers, actors, crews, drivers, production staff, again, the people who make what Americans watch, the experiences that touch our lives, the stories that inspire, the media and the art that expands moral imagination, all of that will be constricted." I don't want to just acknowledge, though, for a second, maybe pun intended, the elephant in the room. It's our Republican colleagues' absence. The Republican Party not willing to come for a hearing on such an urgent affront to so much of what makes America dynamic and our culture and arts thrive. In ordinary times, if allegations of pay-to-play and backroom deals to get mergers approved by the Department of Justice came to light, the Judiciary Committee would haul officials in to answer to what was blatant accusations of pay to play. If a president made public comments stating his intent to influence a merger so that he can get the news coverage he desires, we would hear widespread public condemnations. Any merger of this scale would receive the highest scrutiny by the Antitrust Subcommittee, of which I am the ranking Democrat. Republicans and Democrats alike, though, would say a merger of this scale and import should have the committee's attention. When it was a different company poised to buy Warner Bros., we saw that folks were up in arms. The world was on fire. There was a committee hearing scheduled, but now we are having nothing happen. So let me be direct about what a bipartisan hearing would have addressed. They would have addressed square on the allegations that Paramount has promised the president to make, quote, sweeping changes to CNN after Trump said he thinks, quote, the people that have run CNN for the last long period of time are a disgrace, and that, quote, it is imperative, our president said, that CNN be sold. Allegations of political favoritism in the regulatory process is anti-democratic. And the fact that a company seeking approval of one of the largest media mergers in U.S. history has simply refused to respond to congressional inquiries, including a preservation letter signed by 8 United States senators, this is highly objectionable. It says a lot about a company that is so confident its deal will go through that it will receive not adequate and appropriate scrutiny or be subjected to real oversight. It is doing that, not cooperating with Congress, with a confidence that if you kowtow to a president or flatter them or empower them or enrich them, that somehow your mergers won't have to go through the normal scrutiny. They may have the benefit of a favorable environment today, a White House and DOJ alignment, but that's not always going to be the case. And more Americans are waking up to the fact that all the corporate consolidation that's going on, everywhere from the pharma industry to our farming industries, is bad for consumers, it's bad for our economy, it's bad for the well-being of our democracy. And so I'm grateful for our witnesses today. And I want you all to know their testimony, even though it's not in a normal hearing, is vital. We're hearing from people today that know what consolidation looks like, not from a boardroom, but from a newsroom, a set, a writer's room, a union shop floor, and the halls of justice fighting to preserve our First Amendment rights. Paramount has claimed that this merger will give creators, quote, more avenues for their work, not fewer, but history tells us a much different story. Past consolidations offer a clear preview. Within months of Skydance's August 2025 acquisition of Paramount, CEO David Ellison, as I said, laid off thousands of employees. This is a time that is not about expansion of opportunity, it's about contraction. And it's that concentration of the film industry to just 4 legacy studios that brings about a true crisis. I am going to do everything I can in this hearing to not only elevate these voices, but to truly examine the challenges, to truly examine what's going on. While it may be to the benefit of today's environment for people to rush to quick economic gains, we know the long-term consequences for all Americans. This gives us real concerns about how corruption and corporate influence is undermining our democracy. I believe that we've seen this already at CBS. We've seen $16 million settlement with the president of a meritless lawsuit, the installation of politically aligned people, the resignation of the executive producer of 60 Minutes, the suppression of vetted investigative segments, and the exodus of experienced journalists. We now see the desire to extend that same model to CNN at a moment when cabinet officials are publicly calling for CNN's takeover and calling for the FCC, signaling that it should let the deal through. This is not a normal corporate consolidation. There's much more at stake here, which I know we will explore today. I hope today we hear plainly from our witnesses about what this media would mean for media workers, journalists, for creative independence, for the public's right to a diversity and a genuinely independent press. I hope we hear from our witnesses about what this really means for our democracy and the economic well-being of our country. I urge federal enforcers to review this merger fairly and review it on the law, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. I do want to bring out, before I introduce the witnesses, just that the probably the most knowledgeable senator on all antitrust issues has walked into my left. I suddenly feel like a beaver standing next to the person who constructed the Hoover Dam. But I do want to offer a moment before I introduce the witnesses, if you want to say any introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, and I will be very brief because I want to hear the witnesses and then have to leave, and hopefully I can come back. But I do want to thank you for holding this hearing. Senator Booker, 2 points. We know that over 75% of U.S. industries have become concentrated since the late 1990s. And right now we have a dysfunctional situation over at the Justice Department where the head of the Antitrust Division, someone that we, many of us trusted very much, she received 70-some votes for her confirmation from Democrats and Republicans, is gone and terminated around the time or forced out of this consideration as well as the Ticketmaster case. And so this is a major acquisition that would impact millions of consumers, tens of thousands of workers. And I want to hear from the witnesses on this, but that's concern. But the second concern to me as the daughter of a journalist is just the effect on CNN and the importance of that around-the-clock 24/7 news that is very difficult to come by right now, especially with the world that we are in. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing from your witnesses, and I know that we are in good hands here with Senator Booker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar. I'm going to start with David Borenstein. David is an Oscar-winning director and producer whose work focuses on propaganda, power, and the role the media plays in shaping public understanding. His recent film, Mr. Nobody Against Putin. Yes. Yes. 3 yeses.
I watched it. I'll ask you, it was really good. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. Brought international attention to how quickly institutions can be transformed when media and information are brought under tighter control. David, the floor is yours for a short introduction.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you, Senator Booker, and the committee for inviting me to speak today. I'm here as a member of the documentary filmmaking community, which is in a real moment of crisis. Some of the most important and significant work being made today has fewer and fewer places to exist. And it's not because audiences don't want it, but because the system that decides what gets made and seen is consolidating into the hands of a few players with a narrow and limited view of what audiences should watch. Recently, I had the chance to speak on stage at the Academy Awards in Los Angeles after winning the Oscar for my film, Mr. Nobody Against Putin. I chose to use some of that time to speak against the proposed merger of Paramount and WBD, because I believe this could make the situation for filmmakers like me much, much worse. Why do I think this? As a documentary filmmaker, I've spent much of the last 15 years making films about authoritarian countries, most recently Russia. I've made films about propaganda and mass media, and I've seen how this works as a process. The early stages look similar, regardless of the country. Control over the flow of information consolidates. Storytellers of all types have fewer places to go to tell their stories. What's striking is that free expression isn't lost through overt censorship. You don't need to tell anyone what to say. The pipeline does the work quietly on its own because fewer decision makers control what gets financed and what reaches audiences. This is also important because democracy depends on the stories we tell. Today, more than ever. The world is far more complex than it was in Jefferson's time. Back then, people were voting on issues they could see with their own eyes. Today, voters are asked to make decisions about microchips, global supply chains, AI, and wars happening thousands of miles away. Most people don't experience any of that firsthand. We understand it through the stories we're told. Walter Lippmann, one of the most influential American journalists and political thinkers of the 20th century, grappled with the challenge of informing citizens in an increasingly complex world. 100 years ago, he came to a bleak conclusion. The world is simply too complicated for the average person to keep up. His answer for lawmakers like yourselves was to lean towards technocratic governance, with experts figuring things out behind the scenes while the rest of us are fed a simplified version of reality we can live with. In other words, experts make decisions and we get memes. But that's not the route we the people chose. Instead, we tried something more ambitious, building media systems that could actually serve the public. Public broadcasting, editorial standards, and ownership limits. The idea was not to give up on people, but to give them a fighting chance to understand the world they're voting in. And that only works if those systems stay independent, genuinely diverse, and not concentrated in the hands of a few people who tend to see the world the same way. What's in front of us now isn't abstract. The Paramount-WBD merger is a $110 billion deal that would fuse two of the largest media companies in the world into a single gatekeeper, controlling film studios, streaming platforms, and major news networks under one corporate structure. I've recently joined more than 2,000 filmmakers, actors, and writers in citing a letter opposing this merger because we've seen where this road leads. But it also feels kind of different this time. In most countries I've worked in, China, Russia, and so on, leaders are at least pretending that there is a distance from media consolidation. What's unusual about this moment in the United States is the openness. Government leaders are being explicit about what they want the media to look like, and we're seeing regulatory decisions that allow further concentration to move forward. The administration is openly embracing the possibilities of such great media power resting in so few hands. Just think about those terrible possibilities from the perspective of my own industry. The CNN archive holds more than 4 million assets, over 45 years of global broadcast history covering wars, elections, disasters, and political upheaval. The CBS archive adds decades of CBS news coverage and classic programming. Together, these collections represent a huge portion of the American historical record, and they would fall under a single ownership structure with demonstrated willingness to shape editorial content in alignment with White House preferences. These aren't passive libraries, they're controlled systems. Access requires disclosure, legal review, approval. Pricing can be set without any real competition. An archival filmmaker has described being denied previously available footage because it, in the right holder's judgment, showed American soldiers in a bad light while our country was at war. That is a gatekeeping power over the historical record. An emerged entity with strong political incentives to control the narrative, that power becomes something far more dangerous. Independent filmmakers working on documentaries about democracy, civil rights, immigration, or foreign policy now face extreme challenges reaching American audiences, a situation made much worse by the recent closing of the Center for Public Broadcasting. Films that win the Academy Award for Best Documentary, including my own, could not find a US streaming home. In some cases, perhaps this is because major platforms fear the political consequences of carrying them. A filmmaker whose documentary followed Amazon workers' historic union campaign could not find a distributor because of those distributors' commercial relationships with Amazon Studios. This is the documented, present-day reality of storytelling in a consolidated media market. The range of buyers has become so limited that American documentary filmmakers are flooding to Europe to try to get their films made there. The CPH Docs Film Financing Forum in Denmark, one of Europe's most important annual events for documentary filmmaking, is seeing such an influx of applications from American projects that they don't know what to do with them. We should not accept a situation where so many America's leading and most idealistic storytellers are desperately trying to work outside the country. As documentary filmmakers, we are part of a tradition a century old, built on the idea that storytelling can empower people, strengthen democracy, and unite rather than divide. That only works when there's real space for independent voices. And one last thing. Working in places where a small number of actors control the flow of information taught me something simple. It doesn't just erode democracy. It erodes creativity too. The same forces that flatten political discourse flatten culture. It's not just a dystopia. It's a boring dystopia. I'll close by reiterating the acceptance speech from the Oscars on why it was so important to stop the merger. Mr. Nobody Against Putin is about how you lose your country. You lose it through countless small little acts of complicity. When we act complicit, when a government murders people on the streets of our major cities, when we don't say anything, when oligarchs take over the media and control how we can produce it and consume it. We don't have to accept that. We have to stop the merger. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak, and look forward to answering questions later.
That's extraordinary testimony. I'm looking forward to getting to our next witness. I do want to just note that Senator Blumenthal, who's come here from Connecticut, I'm grateful to have my neighboring state here. It's very hard, though, the imbalance now that the population of the Senate of America in California, with the two California heavyweights are sitting here, where there's much of a creative center to the world, have now both appeared here. Senator Schiff and Senator Padilla, we're grateful for your presence. Connecticut and New Jersey may not add up to California in population, but we do our best. We punch above our weight. Miss Katie Phang, please, we'd love to your testimony next.
Ranking Member Booker, and the senators that are here, thank you for the invitation to testify today about the impending merger between Paramount-Skydance and Warner Bros. Discovery and the threat this mega transaction poses to American democracy. My name is Katie Phang. I'm a trial lawyer, an independent journalist, and a media commentator with extensive experience covering the intersection of law, media politics, and democratic accountability. I'm here today not as a partisan advocate, but as someone who spent her career both inside the courtrooms and inside the newsrooms, and as someone who understands what this kind of consolidation does to journalism and to the public's ability to hold power to account. This proposed merger is one of the most consequential media consolidations in decades. This hearing must examine it closely because the stakes extend far beyond shareholder returns and content libraries. This merger will reshape the information landscape that hundreds of millions of Americans depend upon to understand their world, their government, and their rights for generations to come. I am privileged to appear before you today as a senior advisor for Democracy Defenders Action. I am free to speak my mind without worrying about that the federal government and its corporate oligarch allies will threaten my livelihood should I report critically on their activities. I'm also acutely aware of how many of my former colleagues in mainstream media do not share the freedom to express their honest assessments about this administration and the behavior of convicted felon Donald Trump. When a handful of billionaires and giant corporations control what Americans watch, hear, read, and ultimately discuss, when they exert undue influence on where those discussions are steered, that is when freedom of speech becomes something closer to a branding exercise than a constitutional guarantee. That is the danger of media consolidation. Our founding fathers did not put freedom of the press in the First Amendment because they thought journalism would be profitable. They didn't enshrine the right to freedom of speech because they assumed everybody would be polite, rational, or even truthful. They did it because they understood something essential and sacrosanct. Democracy cannot survive if powerful people get to decide which facts are allowed to exist and what version of the truth they want to peddle for profits. I have worked for years in legacy media as a legal correspondent, legal analyst, and as an anchor and host at then MSNBC. I've witnessed the chilling effects that consolidation exerts on editorial independence. When executives fear that aggressive reporting might antagonize a parent company's business partners, stories disappear or are rewritten to soften the edges. When newsrooms shrink under cost-cutting mandates driven by corporate restructurings and merger debt loads, investigative units, the ones that hold government and corporations accountable, they are the first to go. I don't speak from theory, I speak from experience. I left MSNBC on May 1st of 2025, not because of a specific on-air incident, but because I understood that democracy was facing an existential threat of unprecedented proportions, and that free speech was going to be one of the most effective weapons against autocracy. But that free speech was especially under attack by a presidential administration led by a vindictive bully who didn't hesitate for a second to target the media and call them enemies of the people simply because he didn't like their reporting. To add insult to injury, the broader corporate environment had rapidly begun to evolve into one where media executives were acutely sensitive to tone and content in the wake of Trump's return to power. That sensitivity was not accidental. FCC Chair and willing Trump lackey Brendan Carr, just weeks after Trump was sworn into office the second time, sent threatening letters to NBC, ABC, CBS, and their parent companies, Comcast, Paramount, and Disney, demanding detailed disclosures about those corporations' quote, promotion of invidious forms of discrimination and violation of FCC regulations and civil rights laws through their DEI and diversity policies and programming. The message was painfully clear. You either bend the knee or face regulatory consequences. And the networks capitulated. Corporate leadership operating under that constant drumbeat of regulatory pressure becomes risk-averse in ways that are invisible to the public but felt immediately by the journalists. I could not, on a legacy media platform, say what I freely say today. That some of Trump's executive orders pursue the ethnic cleansing of this country while prioritizing a white Christian nationalist agenda. That a convicted felon whose name appears more than 38,000 times and counting in the Epstein files is unfit physically and mentally for the Oval Office. These hard and truthful things must be said loudly and without apology, but the voices willing to do so in legacy media are increasingly being cowed into silence as corporate executives grow more and more fearful of the Trump administration's wrath. It is this experience that compels me to urge this body to scrutinize this Paramount-Warner Bros. Merger with the rigor that the American public deserves. We don't need to speculate about what an Ellison-controlled news looks like. We're living it in real time at CBS. Since the Ellisons installed Bari Weiss as the network's editorial leader, they have explicitly steered the network toward a more conservative editorial line. For instance, 60 Minutes, one of the gold standards of American investigative journalism, temporarily shelved a segment on the CCOT detention facility in El Salvador, where the Trump administration has been deporting immigrants. The Supreme Court recognized in 1945 in Associated Press versus United States that the First Amendment's guarantee of a free press means nothing if private concentrations of power can achieve the same suppressive effect as government censorship. What we face today is precisely that convergence, a federal government using its regulatory leverage through FCC license threats, merger approval authority, and multi-million-dollar legal settlements to steer media ownership towards families it trusts and away from editorial voices it does not. When the government shapes who owns the press and the press shapes what the public knows, then the First Amendment has not been violated in form. The First Amendment has been gutted in fact. When too few companies own too much of the media, editorial independence becomes fragile. News divisions that once had the independence to challenge power become subsidiaries buried under entertainment conglomerates that care more about quarterly earnings than constitutional values. Maybe no executive ever says that quiet part out loud. Maybe there's no smoking gun email that says kill the story. But human beings are more subtle than that, right? Careers are made and destroyed through suggestion, through silence, through many a raised eyebrow. And so that result is journalists, and they start asking themselves questions they should never have to ask. Can I report aggressively on this company if our parent corporation has a business relationship with them? Can I criticize this politician if the CEO is looking for access to the White House? Can I pursue this story if it's going to upset our shareholders? Those are not hypothetical concerns. We already have a real-world example of Paramount and the Ellisons' willingness to attack journalists who criticize them. Just yesterday, Paramount pulled all of its advertising from The Ankler simply because its editorial director and chief columnist, Richard Rushfield, carried a bag of buttons in support of the Block the Merger campaign. Those are the corrosive realities of consolidation. I have reported on First Amendment law for years. I have covered the cases. I've interviewed the litigants. I've explained that doctrine to millions of viewers. And I can tell you that the framers designed the Free Press Clause precisely because that they understood that a concentrated power, whether held by a king, a parliament, or a corporation acting in coordination with a government, poses an existential threat to self-governance. What this merger enables is not a hypothetical version of that threat. It's an operational one. Every time we permit a major media consolidation to proceed without genuine safeguards, we shrink the universe of independent editorial voices. We reduce the number of institutions that are capable of holding power to account. We make the information ecosystem more fragile, more susceptible to top-down pressure, and more vulnerable to the kind of political capture that ends careers and kills stories. In conclusion, the First Amendment doesn't exist to make life easier for media executives that are trying to squeeze another few cents out of a stock price. It exists to protect the messy, noisy, frustrating, essential business of self-government. It exists to protect dissent and to protect criticism. It exists to protect the ability of ordinary people to challenge the powerful. This body has an opportunity, and I would submit the obligation, to ensure that the Paramount-Skydance Warner Bros. Discovery merger does not proceed without robust enforceable conditions that protect the public interest, preserve local news, safeguard independent filmmakers and creative workers, and defend the independence of journalists who serve the American people each and every day. This is no time to bow down to a tyrant. Do not give in to the lies. Don't give in to the fear. Hold on to the truth. And because I am a journalist, I'm going to break news. An American jury has just returned a verdict finding that Ticketmaster Live Nation illegally monopolized the ticketing market. That is the American people that are speaking out, that they don't want mega companies having a stranglehold on industry spaces. It has been a privilege to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Katie, before I go to Michael, I just want to say that my staff sent me this note that I did not read your paragraph, but I think you have more than shown your extraordinary qualifications and your invaluable contributions to this day, so I'm very grateful.
Thanks.
Michael, I'm going to read your paragraph before my staff yells at me, and say, Michael Isaac is the Director of Legal Services at the Writers Guild of America East, which represents more than 7,500 writers and creators across film, television, news, and digital media. You bring expertise on how media consolidation affects writers, creative workers, and the diversity of storytellers that make it to the screen. Thank you very much for being here, Michael.
Thank you very much, Senator Booker. We appreciate your convening this event. And
You got to push your mic till it becomes a green button.
all right, thank you. I'll try it again.
All right.
Thank you very much, Senator Booker, for convening this event, and we appreciate all the senators in attendance today. We also wish this was a bipartisan hearing, but we believe that that should not stop us from drawing attention to the grave dangers posed by the impending merger of Warner Brothers and Paramount. By way of introduction, the Writers Guild of America East and West together represents a total of about 18,000 creative professionals. They write for news and entertainment programming in television, film, radio, and cable. Just about all the professional scripted content that you will see on film and television is written by our members. Our members are journalists who work at outlets such as ABC, CBS, and MS Now. We represent writers and podcasters and online media at outlets such as Vox Media, Huffington Post, Slate, and Hearst. And as the representative of those creative professionals, we have for decades called attention to the threat that a consolidated marketplace poses to workers, consumers, and the diversity of content and viewpoints. When the news broke that Netflix and Paramount were bidding to acquire Warner Brothers, our union spoke out forcefully against either merger, because no matter who acquires Warner Brothers, the result of media consolidation is always the same: fewer jobs, fewer options for consumers, and higher prices. While Paramount stands poised to acquire Warner Brothers, this merger can and should be prevented because it represents a further erosion of competition in an already consolidated market for entertainment and a unique threat to a free and independent press. Decades of consolidation have led to a broken system that is dominated by a handful of studios. Today, there are 6 major buyers of scripted film and TV of our members: Disney, Netflix, Amazon, Warner, Paramount, and NBC. These are vertically integrated companies producing the content as well as distributing that content around the world on their own streaming services. If Warner merges with Paramount, that combined company would immediately become the largest employer of our members, a media behemoth with tremendous leverage to reduce content, raise prices, increase control of production, suppress competition, worsen working conditions, and silence the voices of our members. At the same time, Paramount is poised to dominate the news business by controlling both CBS News and CNN. The outcome is not hard to predict because we have already seen the transformation at CBS News in the wake of its merger with Skydance. Under the new leadership, CBS imposed mass layoffs and we believe sought to appease bad faith and partisan critics instead of standing by the journalists who have built its reputation. The outcomes that I describe are not inevitable. They are the result of policy choices, and Congress and our antitrust enforcers have the tools to change course if they have the courage to use them. For those of us who grew up relying on institutions like CBS Evening News, CBS Mornings, and 60 Minutes, it has been very sad and frustrating to see these trusted institutions undermined in the lead up to and in the wake of Paramount's merger with Skydance. Based on recent actions, it is hard to avoid the conclusion that Paramount sought to obtain regulatory approval for its merger with Skydance by appeasing the administration's bad faith attacks on the media. One obvious example is President Trump's baseless lawsuit against CBS News alleging bias at 60 Minutes, which surely would have been tossed out of court like so many other lawsuits against the media had the company not paid a $16 million settlement in July 2025. This, we believe, was a betrayal of CBS's own employees at 60 Minutes, including Guild members who work at that program and take seriously the journalistic standards that program has worked to maintain. CBS, of course, denied that the settlement was tied to the merger, yet I believe that its motives became even clearer when it canceled The Late Show immediately after Stephen Colbert joked about the settlement. The result will be the layoff of the entire staff who work on the show, including the Guild-represented writing team. We think that the message to artists is clear. Watch what you say, or you will be next. CBS's appeasement of bad faith attacks on the media did not stop there. CBS acquiesced to FCC Brendan Carr's demand that it appoint an ombudsman to combat allegations of media bias. CBS eliminated its diversity initiatives, disbanded its race and culture unit, and in one instance, one of our members was reprimanded for writing correctly that RFK Jr. spread misinformation about vaccines. That member was among the first to be laid off when Skydance took over. CBS's news programming has increasingly been marked by its new owner, notably by hiring Barry Weiss as editor-in-chief. Her past experience was not in television journalism, but running the Free Press, a website with political leanings that align with its new owners. The Free Press writers now routinely appear as commenters on CBS's streaming platform, and its websites are filled with links to Free Press articles. We have seen, as was previously mentioned, well-researched and reported stories on 60 Minutes held back for what we consider to be flimsy reasons. And numerous high-profile departures from CBS point to the same explanation. Those folks have exited CBS because they believe they could not maintain their journalistic integrity while complying with the political demands of the new leadership. Predictably, the Paramount-Skydance merger led to massive job losses almost immediately. October 2025, Paramount cut about 1,000 jobs, including 100 at CBS News, including our members. That was apparently not enough. Less than a month ago, CBS News rolled out another wave of layoffs, this time tragically eliminating CBS News Radio, which had been part of CBS for nearly 100 years. In all, almost a third of our members who work under our national agreement with CBS have either been laid off or pushed to early retirement by accepting buyouts. The employees who have remained at CBS News have struggled to maintain the same level of quality with low staffing levels, working long days, longer weeks. We had been in negotiations with CBS News to provide fair compensation for those employees, and that led the entire Guild-represented staff at CBS News 24/7 to walk off the job en masse for a fair contract, and ultimately they did win a fair contract with the strongest contract that we've seen ever for that shop. Turning to the entertainment segment of our membership, as a viewer, it may seem that there are an endless number of places to find content, but in reality, these platforms and networks are owned and controlled by a small number of companies. Most Guild members who write for the screen or episodic television are always looking for the next project in order to maintain a livable income and to provide health insurance for themselves and their families. With a merger of Paramount and Warner, those work opportunities will be fewer. The combination of Paramount and Warner Bros. Would create the largest employer of our members, controlling nearly a quarter of TV earnings and over 20% of screen earnings. A combined Paramount-Warner Bros. Discovery company would control about 33% of the market for highly paid screenwriters, 32% of the market for highly compensated TV writers and what are called overall deals, and 20% of the market for writing on half-hour TV series. And those numbers are roughly double the market control that Paramount has presently. This consolidation will stifle competition from independent producers and distributors and enable monopoly power over writers and other industry workers, giving outsized control over what content reaches audiences. The vertical integration that these companies exercise means that the players in the entertainment market must be both producers and streaming distributors to be competitive, which is a significant barrier for new, smaller, independent companies to enter the market, increasing the big companies' control over production markets and writers. It is rare that you truly get a new market for new projects with multiple outlets competing. In the 2024 to 25 television season, nearly 3/4 of online scripted content on the major streaming platforms were self-supplied. This is a business where competition between employers supports creativity and variety in the marketplace of ideas, but Wall Street doesn't want that. They want more mergers because they want the remaining companies to be able to continue to raise prices while putting out less content, resulting in consumers paying more and getting less, resulting in fewer jobs and companies with greater power to demand more work for less pay. We believe that the tools to block this merger are available. For instance, in the court decision blocking the merger between Penguin Random House's proposed acquisition of Simon & Schuster, that decision pointed out that it would lead to diminished variety in the marketplace of ideas and less diversity of content. When we know what the outcome of this merger will look like, because we have seen this before, the Warner Discovery merger from only a few years ago showed that consolidation hurts diversity by increasing the power of gatekeepers to decide whose stories are told. That merger cost several cancellations of projects created by people from marginalized communities. It resulted in a loss of nearly $2 billion in proposed content. Then there is the Disney-Fox merger, which combined two major producers and distributors, which has been terrible for writers. It enabled the company to reduce output and hire fewer writers and shut down businesses that the company acquired that competed with Disney, like Blue Sky Studios. Disney closed the competing Fox Animation Studio, pulled back content it licensed to Netflix, banned Netflix from advertising on its television entertainment networks, and pressed creators and other workers to forego sharing in future licensing revenue on Disney shows. Disney's acquisition of Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and Fox have reduced innovative development in favor of focusing on franchise films, reducing variety and choice at the theater. Now the company owns two of the four largest streaming services, Disney and Hulu, and they plan to combine them. Warner Brothers is not in need of new owners because it is a profitable company with 128 million streaming subscribers, which is projected to grow to 150 million by the end of 2026. And it is increasingly profitable. Its studios enjoyed a record-setting year in 2025, surpassing $4 billion in global box office revenue. As a union, the Writers Guild has worked to try to push back against these developments. We have negotiated diversity initiatives in our collective bargaining agreements that cannot be eliminated at the owner's whim. We have guaranteed severance and seniority protections in our contracts in the event of layoff, and we will defend any member who is punished or fired for upholding journalistic standards against political attacks. But more needs to be done to prevent the drive towards consolidation that is at the heart of this problem. And that is why the Paramount-Warner Brothers merger must be stopped. Block the merger. Thank you.
Michael, that was such vital testimony, though for a second there I thought you were trying to break my 25-hour record. I'm very grateful for everything that you had to say. I want to make sure, because senators, as you can see, are moving in and out, and I know we have two more witnesses. I'm hoping the witnesses will keep their comments to about 5 minutes. Ms. Mara Verheyden-Hilliard. Oh, I'm supposed to read your paragraph, forgive me. You are a constitutional rights litigator, co-founder and executive director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, and a member of the steering committee of Jane Fonda's Committee for the First Amendment. For more than 3 decades, since you were 4, you have litigated major First Amendment and civil rights cases involving surveillance, suppression of dissent, and threats to free expression. We are so grateful that you took time to be here with us today, and I look forward to your testimony.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Senator Booker, for inviting us to be present here today and for holding this critically important spotlight hearing on the proposed Paramount-Warner Bros. Discovery merger. As a First Amendment litigator who has, over decades, as you said, since I was 4, defended the rights of people to speak out, to say what they believe in. I've defended people who've been targeted because of their viewpoint, because of their political expression. And I can tell you that the threat to free speech, the threat to the First Amendment, and fundamentally to democracy right now is profound, and it is growing. This greater consolidation will create an unprecedented and extraordinary power over creative expression, information, and news. This is a decision about what we are allowed to say and what we are allowed to hear as people in the United States. We are experiencing a widespread open assault on free speech unlike anything in our lifetimes. This is an administration that seeks in all ways possible to crush dissenting voices and to crush anyone that dares tell the truth about its lawlessness. The president openly brags that he is reshaping the media. There is reason that President Trump is desperate to consolidate news and information and entertainment. This monopoly, the media monopoly, of all types of monopolies, is the most powerful. It is one that affects free speech, the expression of ideas, and this is the lifeblood of an informed democracy. It serves to create just a handful of gatekeepers who can with greater ease be controlled, those who will cower to threats, and those who are also quite happy to pander because it serves their billionaire interests and their own aligned political viewpoints. The monopoly owner easily becomes a proxy force for government-approved or preferred viewpoint and directed censorship. They will cloak government censorship behind their curtain. This poses a pure threat to our precious First Amendment. We are already suffering from the vast corporate control over major media, and every media consolidation pulls the plug on voices, silencing each until there is one voice in control. You can have 100 channels and thousands of programs, but when they are under singular control, the content, what we hear in America, will be cabined. What is expressed and what we hear becomes increasingly rigidly canned into a homogeneous product. The richness of the human experience, of the brilliant creative minds, of differing points of view, of dissent, of challenge to the status quo, becomes silenced. We will increasingly be fed a diet of narrowly approved thoughts, and censorship will be rampant. Censorship can take many forms. Overt censorship through the cancellation of or refusal to mount shows and movies based on a search for the lowest common denominator of dollar generation, censorship based on political viewpoint and expression that does not track with the narrow ownership of platforms of expression, censorship because of allegiance to or directive of a president and chair of the FCC who explicitly target expression based on viewpoint in direct violation of the First Amendment, and self-censorship from all those who fear that the only way to be greenlit is to avoid the issues of the day. Our society can only function and move forward with robust debate and with the opportunity for viewpoints to be shared. Our entire history is replete with voices challenging circumstances as they are, changing social consciousness, educating us all to get to a better place. Our country witnessed Bloody Sunday at the Edmund Pettus Bridge when reporter Bill Plant took the country there. And people from other parts of America could see firsthand what the civil rights movement was facing, and they were moved to join the fight against Jim Crow apartheid. Just as now, people across the United States have organized their communities against kidnapping of their neighbors, their coworkers, their family members, and others have witnessed them speaking out and witnessed this administration's execution of protesters, and they have been moved to join the fight because they saw the truth despite the government's shocking lies. So what happens when this becomes grayed out across controlled platforms at the government's behest? Right now, we are witnessing an unlawful war against Iran with war crimes openly confessed and carried out by this unhinged administration. And yet when CNN merely reported that the administration had underestimated the war's impact on the Strait of Hormuz, the administration became apoplectic as it volleyed its reflexive lies with no hesitancy and aggressive intensity, stating that this was, quote, fake news, which of course every one of us knows was not. Pete Hegseth then said that the sooner that David Ellison takes over CNN, the better. Brendan Carr threatened the license of any broadcaster who tells the truth about the war, since he deemed that truth fake news. And then President Trump followed by calling for treason charges against journalists. Treason, to be clear, is an executable offense. So now we have the President of the United States calling for journalists to be executed for telling the truth about the war in Iran. Contrast this with Walter Cronkite and the war in Vietnam. In 1968, after the Tet Offensive, he said to the American people that believing the administration's claims of victory in the bloody experience of Vietnam were to believe those who had been wrong before, and that it was clear to him that the only rational way out was to negotiate not as victors. He gave voice to an opinion that was being expressed by millions of people in the streets, on college campuses, and including many in the armed forces, that this was a war that needed to end. It was a truth-telling moment, and it helped galvanize public opinion that was already showing itself. Walter Cronkite had the freedom to do that. He was Walter Cronkite. He wasn't being dictated to. He wasn't accepting his talking points from government entities. Now he would simply be fired. As Jane Fonda, who recently relaunched the Committee for the First Amendment, said, this merger would be one of the most destructive threats to free speech and creative expression in our history. Democracy cannot mean simply that an electorate gets to vote every 2 or 4 years for representatives. Democracy has to include an informed public. Included in the debates and the discussions, many voices have to be heard. We cannot afford this hollowing out of democracy.
Before we go to our last witness, I just want to make mention that Elizabeth Warren has joined us. She is the senator from Massachusetts, even though my mother voted for her to be president of the United States. I would like to now introduce Mark Ruffalo. He is an acclaimed actor and producer whose career has spanned major studio films, independent projects, and public advocacy on democratic accountability and media issues. He brings a profound perspective of an actual working artist who has spoken out about how consolidation can narrow creative opportunity and limit the range of storytelling in Hollywood. Mr. Ruffalo, thank you very much for being here today, or being digitally here today.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Booker and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony today about the potentially devastating impact of the possible merger between Paramount-Skydance and Warner Bros. Discovery on the film, television, and media industry. My colleagues and I are filmmakers. We're actors, producers, directors, writers, distributors, exhibitors, and film workers. We tell stories that move people across the world and across generations. We document injustice, bear witness to history, and hold power accountable. Our industry did not ask for this fight. We'd rather be making films than battling corporate consolidation, but the issues at stake are far too important to remain silent. The merger threatens more than our livelihood. It threatens one of the world's most vital industries, one that starts conversation that countries need to have, that makes people everywhere laugh, cry, and see themselves and one another with greater clarity and humanity. And that's why I'm testifying today, and why over 2,500, as of today, my friends and colleagues signed this open letter of opposition to this transaction. The merger, it comes at the worst possible moment. Our industry is already in crisis. Los Angeles County's motion picture workforce fell by 42,000 jobs between 2022 and 2024. The Writers Guild documented that 1,319 television writing jobs disappeared in a single season. The Art Directors Guild suspended its training program after more than 75% of its 3,000 members reported unemployment by stating it cannot in good conscience encourage you to pursue our profession while so many of our members remain unemployed. We are not a healthy industry absorbing a manageable shock. We are a battered one absorbing what may be a fatal blow. I can personally say that Los Angeles right now is hanging by a thread. The Paramount-Skydance transaction that immediately preceded this deal produced 2,000 layoffs, roughly 10% of Paramount's workforce. The Disney-Fox merger shuttered Fox 2000 and Blue Sky Studios outright. The pattern is documented and predictably repeats. A merger announcement, promises of efficiency, then mass layoffs and production cuts. Over and over and over again. That's the cycle. It's predictable because this deal is backed by an immense amount of debt. That burden will force the combined entity to extract more revenue from consumers and cut more costs from workers, resulting in slashed budgets, lower salaries, and layoffs. And by layoffs, I mean people being fired. Subscription prices will rise. Workers will be squeezed. Audiences will lose access to the rich diversity of content that competition makes possible. For independent filmmakers, distributors, and the industry's 122,000 small businesses, the harm runs deep. The independent film licensing market has already contracted dramatically. Over a decade ago, when I was coming up, Sundance was renowned for late-night bidding wars where multiple distributors competed to secure breakout titles. That dynamic has largely disappeared, especially true for independent films. This merger will have a devastating ripple effect across the independent film and media supply chain, a system the Future Film Coalition has been working to make more visible. When buyers disappear, so does the financing that makes new films possible. In their place, independent creators are left to accept terms that would not exist in a competitive market. That is not negotiation, it's capitulation under duress. Congress, and I have to say, it's mind-blowing to me that we have one of the biggest mergers in history happening, where hundreds of thousands of jobs are on the line across the United States, where consumers are going to have to pay whatever ransom this conglomeration, consolidation forces on them. And we're missing half of our political parties, our political system. The GOP decides not to show up. It's outrageous. Congress must also acknowledge that what it means for one entity, one family, to control CNN, CBS, HBO, Warner Brothers Pictures, Paramount Pictures, and TikTok. There's never been anything like this. The Wall Street Journal has already reported that David Ellison told the president directly that he would make sweeping changes to CNN if the acquisition succeeded. We have watched CBS News transform under ideological pressure from the very same interest pushing this merger. We watched what Jeff Bezos did to the Washington Post. This promises to be exponentially worse. Administration officials have been transparent in their intentions. We have Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth openly declared that the sooner David Ellison takes over CNN, the better. Presumably because an Ellison-controlled CNN would report more positive on the administration and this calamitous war in Iran. Even before this merger, the evidence of ideological gatekeeping was already documented and measurable. No other land. The 2025 Academy Award-winning Best Documentary Feature could not find a U.S. distributor because they feared the subject matter, the apartheid in Palestine territory in the West Bank. Even after winning the Oscar, our highest award for film, major streamers refused to release the film. Holding Liat, a U.S.-made documentary about an Israeli-American family who refused to decouple the terror they experienced on October 7th from the broad systemic suffering of their Palestinian neighbors, could not find a single commercial distributor in America, even though it won the coveted top documentary prize in the Berlin Film Festival and was distributed in nearly a dozen other countries. The filmmakers approached more than 30 U.S. streamers. All of them passed. This is America. We are the land of the free. These concepts were enshrined in our Constitution. Our industry has already felt the cold and devastating hand of censorship through constant concerted government and corporate power. In the 1940s and 1950s, the House Un-American Activities Committee used blacklisting to compel studios to police the political views of the artists they employed. Careers ended. Films completely suppressed. Lives were destroyed. The industry capitulated to political pressure because concentrated power made resistance impossible. The structural conditions that made that era of censorship possible, a small number of powerful gatekeepers controlling access to production, distribution, and exhibition, are precisely the conditions this merger would create. My colleagues, Susan Sarandon and Melissa Barrera, are just two examples of leading American artists who have been effectively blacklisted for their human rights advocacy, even though their work has contributed to our country's economy, its well-being, and cultural capital. Now, this harkens back to the blacklist through the U.S. Paul Holt Robeson, Hazel Scott, Golden Trumbo, the countless others were blacklisted. With our Constitution's First Amendment, it's first for a reason. Free speech is the very foundation of our democracy. Some of us may have disagreements about the genocide in Palestine and other vital issues. What matters is that we can discuss them openly and emphatically, especially in the halls of Congress, in the news, and on our cinema screens. Democracy means free of censorship and to speak free. Continued consolidation will make all of this work. We've all lined up against each other. And because of that lining up, this is possible. This has become possible. It's an undeniable structural pattern. As the number of buyers shrinks, so does the range of perspectives those buyers will distribute. This viewpoint suppression will not end with Israel. It will expand to more and more controversial issues, criticism of corporate power, support for labor rights, government accountability, and so on, until eventually the only messages coming out of our industry will be those that billionaires and the government that serves them want us to hear. I've heard from my colleagues who are scared to sign an open letter opposing the merger because they fear retaliation in America. And they're right to. Paramount has already retaliated against the industry publication of Ankler pulling all of its advertising because of one journalist choose to support the block the merger campaign and walk around with a bag full of buttons. As the Trump regime moves to repress the mere mention of words like climate change, anti-racism, gay, non-binary, transgender, abortion, gender-based violence, immigrants, Native Americans, disability, and even science-based and housing, affordability from use by federal agents, those same terms are also being deployed to flag the element and eliminate federal funding, undermining institutions like the National Endowment of the Humanities for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts by slashing or eliminating grants for art and community storytelling and dismantling the Corporation for Public Broadcast. The administration has made the overwhelming threat that media consolidation poses to journalistic integrity, independent media, and artistic freedom crystal clear. You do not have to watch Citizen Kane nor read 1984 to understand that the concentrated oligarchic control this merger represents is a threat to free press, an informed populace, and democracy itself. The suppression of the CBS 60 Minutes story about El Salvador's brutal free concentration camp, where ICE detainees were sent, is a powerful preview of the corporation, of the corruption and censorship we can expect if this merger goes through. The Washington Post's famous slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness," is true. The absence of a free and independent media, including independent film, injustice can be obscured from public view and will ultimately rot the foundations of our nation. This is why I cannot stand by and allow this merger to proceed without using my voice and my platform to raise this alarm. I mean, tens of thousands of workers will be left poor because of this merger. So will the audiences we serve. The workers across the country who depend on our business and the thriving marketplace of ideas and artistic freedom. We could lose the ability to make seminal films that speak truth to power, from All the President's Men, dramatizing the post-courageous Watergate coverage, to vital documentaries like Citizen4, exposing the NSA's global mass surveillance program. Paramount and the Ellisons would have us believe that the combined entity will release 30 films a year and will give artists more avenues for work by taking away avenues. Don't trust empty promises from billionaires driven by greed and corrosive ideology. Don't trust that somehow this new company will make more films with less money and so much more debt. Trust competition. In conclusion, I join more than over 2,500 colleagues of mine in urging Congress, our agencies, our unions, and partners in the state to stand against this merger. We ask that you investigate and document the harms to everyday Americans who will see increased prices for fewer options, the harms to tens of thousands of media professionals, largely middle-class workers, who will lose their jobs when Ellisons and their Saudis, Qataris, and Emirati partners try to squeeze every penny out of this massive entity that harms our deep democracy. This depends on a vibrant, independent media to hold power to account, and the irreparable harm to our country and the world if we are prohibited from telling the stories that teach us how to see each other with grace, love, and humanity. I appreciate your time and story.
Thank you. That was incredible testimony from all of our witnesses. I'm grateful. We've been joined by the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. I understand he has a lot of things pulling him in different directions, so I want to give him an opportunity to go ahead.
Thank you very much. And let me thank Chair Booker for organizing this hearing, this very important hearing. And that was when our Republican colleagues on the committee refused. They seem to refuse to have hearings on anything. We haven't even had a single hearing on the war. And it's 49 days. It's incredible. Anyway, I also want to thank Senator Schiff and Senator Warren for being here, and all the witnesses. Thank you very much for coming and testifying. The merger of Paramount-Skydance with Warner Bros. Discovery should alarm every single person who is worried about higher costs for news and streaming services, who's worried about editorial independence, who's worried about dwindling jobs in the creative industry, something we in New York and New Jersey and California and Massachusetts care a lot about, the whole country. If allowed, the merger would be one of the largest in American history. One single company would control not just Warner Brothers and Paramount, but CNN, CBS, HBO, DC Studios, Cartoon Network, and many other of America's most recognizable brands. It's amazing to think all of these entities, which used to be independent, and you could get different voices, are all going to be under one roof. That's not the America we know and love. In addition, one family would own all those networks, as well as multiple streaming services, and in addition to everything else, one of the most popular social media platforms, of course, TikTok. When monopolies like this run rampant, costs go up, I would tell every American consumer. You say, oh, this is sort of merger talk. It's going to raise your costs, raise your costs. Competition goes down. Competition both in the creative world, but also in the information world, which so many of these entities have a great deal of say in and a great deal of control. Innovation dies, independence is weakened. So if you're frustrated by high streaming fees, this merger's a nightmare. Fees will keep going up, folks, while the incentives to improve services to customers go down. Worse, this merger reeks of corruption and political manipulation. Donald Trump said he wanted to be, quote, involved in deciding the outcome. That's outrageous in itself. And then everyone should be asking, were there any backroom promises made? Oh, let this merger go through. We'll treat you nice, Donald. We can't ask Gail Slater, because Trump pushed her out when she was head of the Department of Justice Antitrust Division. David Ellison, the CEO of Paramount, is a big Trump ally, just like his father. And if this merger happened, the right wing will continue to take greater control of America's largest media companies and suffocate independent voices. They've made promises to Trump that will provide favorable coverage and editorial change. Ellison has already started installing people, putting in new people in many of these agencies, and that is of great worry. We need a diversity of voices in democracy. This merger would go a long way to wiping that out. Thank you. And I thank my colleagues for their indulgence.
Thank you very much, Chuck. I'm going to turn to Senator Warren now for any questions you might have for our extraordinary witnesses.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Booker, for pulling us all together here. Thank you, Mr. Leader, for being here, and Senator Schiff. So I want to ask some questions about content. Several of you have talked about this, but this is the part that will touch everybody in America. It will shape the stories we have a chance to hear, the news that we're informed about, how we describe ourselves, and how we understand the rest of the world. So I'm prompted to do this because I was reading not long ago that Severance almost didn't get made, and that the original script was written and the idea for it more than a decade ago, and that the Dan Erickson had taken it around, just couldn't get anybody to bite. But the difference was there were a lot of different places to take it. And so ultimately, Apple said, we'll give it a chance. And sure enough, obviously, we all know it happened, and turned out to be this fabulously successful show. So I think about what it would mean if there was just one guy who was making all the decisions about what gets made. Not only the chance that Severance never gets made, but how many other things never get made, and how much do our stories start to all look like each other that fit into the taste of one person, or one person who's working within the very narrow confines of their corporate instructions. So that's what I think is at risk in the Warner Brothers Paramount merger. Mr. Isaac, you're with the Writers Guild of America East, the labor union that represents the writers and the creators. So let me just give you a minute here to say, if media companies get bigger and this merger goes through, do you think there are going to be more opportunities to make great films, great shows, breakout ideas, or fewer? And will the number of jobs in the industry go up or go down?
The industry is already shrinking. The industry is already producing less programming. And at the same time, we know that the studios maintain profitability by increasing their fees for streaming services and by placing ads on their services with increasing frequency. Our members are in the business of telling stories and coming up with ideas and planning for what they hope will be the next great show. Those are opportunities that are getting fewer and fewer and will only be even less where the places to sell those screenplays or those story ideas diminish. We think that that is certainly a terrible outcome for our members, but it is a disservice to the audience that will be deprived of those stories and the diversity of the stories that they bring.
You know, and it's not just the stories that we miss out on. There's a huge free speech issue here, and I know several of you have alluded to this. You know, we all saw Nexstar take Jimmy Kimmel off the air because the FCC criticized him, and it was only this huge public outcry that managed to get him restored. And then obviously we saw CBS, which is owned by Paramount, cancel Colbert 3 days after he criticized Paramount's settlement with Trump. And of course, just in case anybody misses it, a few weeks later, Trump then approves the then pending merger that gets us to where we are now. So in the months since Paramount's new CEO, David Ellison, has taken over CBS, we've seen layoffs, we've seen entire news divisions cut, and we've seen meddling with the reporting. And now David Ellison wants to control CNN too, which is owned by Warner Bros. So, Mr. Ruffalo, you have been outspoken about the dangers of this new merger. A few weeks ago, I want to go back to something you quoted in your testimony here. A few weeks ago, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said, quote, "The sooner David Ellison takes over CNN, the better." And I just want you to spin out for us a little bit. What do you think he actually meant by that? And what would it mean for Americans' access to the news?
Thank you, Senator Warren. Well, clearly it was in the context of the coverage for the catastrophic Iran war, a war of choice that's dragged us into a quagmire now. And he was lamenting, from my read and anyone else I knew, that he felt that they weren't giving him a positive enough spin. A positive spin in a time of war means that the American people do not get the full truth of what's happening in the battleground. Families do not understand what's happening with their children. And what it actually does, because we're living in a multi sort of reality of the internet, the truth sort of starts to seep out, and it corrodes our credibility as a government. It corrodes the credibility of the media. And in time, what you'll see happen is people turn away. And I see that as if we can't trust our media, then we can't trust our country. That's why the only profession enshrined in the Constitution is journalism.
Right. I like that. You know, I want to pick up on your theme, though, about how dangerous this is. If reporting negative news about a war is grounds for saying, oh, we need a different media company here, because then the news will be very positive and be even further removed from the reality. It threatens our democracy, and at a moment when we are at war, when costs are going up, and when we have an administration that doesn't want us to understand the truth about that war, I think we're really at risk. So I want to go to just one more piece of what we've seen in this moment around the merger, and that is President Trump said he wants to be, quote, personally involved in deciding who takes over Warner Brothers. And as you know, he's attacked comedians, talk show hosts, journalists, anyone who criticizes Donald Trump. Mr. Borenstein, does that sound like anyone you know? Maybe someone you, I don't know, filmed a documentary about?
Well, definitely there are parallels. And having made a documentary in Russia the last few years and being surrounded by Russians on my film team, I kept wanting to make kind of analogies to what's happening here and make comparisons. But one thing actually that is interesting to hear back from my colleagues on that film, my Russian colleagues, was, no, don't make this comparison. It's totally different. What's happening in America is quicker. It's happening quicker right now. If you compare, the speed of some of the things that we're seeing, it is actually different from Putin's first few years in office. So that's what I have to say. That's my report from my film team.
Right. Well, I appreciate it. You know, it is the job of the Department of Justice to enforce our anti-monopoly laws. With the corruption in the Trump administration and the corruption now at the Department of Justice, I'm not holding my breath, but I will point out that the state attorneys general are stepping up and reminding us that the rule of law may be in trouble, but there are still some folks out there fighting for it. And I think that's what's critical, is that we all stand up and fight back. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you.
Amen. I'm going to turn to Senator Schiff, who is obviously the senator from California, which is one of our great nations, hubs of creators and many of the industries that we're discussing today. I want to make note that after him will be Congressman Jamie Raskin, who is a hero on this side of the Capitol. I don't know how you're treated on your side of the Capitol, sir, but over here, we on this side of the Capitol, we love you, sir. But I'm gonna now defer to the great senator from the great state of California, Senator Schiff.
Senator Booker, thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you for your leadership in this area, more important now than ever. As you know, I hosted a similar hearing in Burbank. Proud to represent really the heart of this industry, and the testimony there was likewise deeply important and disturbing all at the same time, as all of your testimony has been. I have a lot of familiarity in representing Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, Hollywood in my House district for the last couple decades with the industry, and I love the industry, and it's a creative workforce second to none anywhere in the world, and I want to protect it. I also, in a small way, come from the workforce. Early in my career before Congress, I wrote a few screenplays. I was represented by William Morris, to the point where President Trump once referred to me as a failed screenwriter. As I told my staff at the time, he doesn't realize what a great compliment he is paying me. Half of my constituents are failed screenwriters, and they're going to think he's just like me. Mr. Ruffalo, I wanted to begin with you. You gave such a comprehensive summary of all of the flaws in this merger, all the dangers of this merger, to the workforce, to diversity in the media, to viewpoint consolidation, to exhibitors, to the whole spectrum of workers in the industry, to consumers. I don't know how this pencils out when you're going into that kind of debt, you're leveraging to that extent, unless you're going to massively increase the cost of content, unless you're going to massively lay off the workforce. And I completely agree with you. We have seen promise after promise the mergers will create more synergies and more jobs, and of course the opposite has happened. So my question is, these are all folks who are going to lose from this deal. Consumers are going to lose, workers in the industry are going to lose, those who want a truly independent media are going to lose. Who are the winners here? So, Ms. Ruffalo, who are the winners here?
Honestly, I don't know who the winners are. The winners are David Zaslav, who is going to walk away with $780 million from this deal for basically crushing Warner Brothers to the point where they were carrying so much debt that they had to sell it at this point. I mean, it's obscene. And I think that sort of signals what this is about. This is about the hollowing out of another industry in the United States. We're seeing it happening all over the country right now. And it's part of this crony capitalism. I feel like everyone's creating their golden parachute to leave the rest of us behind, to leave the workers behind, to leave the people who go to movies behind. It'll be the Ellisons. It'll be the Qatari government. It'll be the Saudis. It'll be the people who put money into this thing at $110 billion in debt. And then it feels like a smash and grab to me. This is a spiraling. We've seen it happen time and time again. It'll destroy our industry. And these people will be made so much richer for it, and they'll use it to parlay other businesses by using the political power that having such consolidated media and news power will give to them. And those are the ones who will cash in, and the rest of us will be cashed out.
Thank you for that. I think it's a very helpful context to think about this not in isolation, but in combination with all the other industries we've seen hollowed out, all the other jobs we've seen shipped overseas. For a long time, we didn't think these jobs could be shipped overseas, but now we could see how easily they are. And that ease of moving these jobs overseas will just become greater as technology and AI is incorporated into the movie-making business. And I think you also correctly point out that those who are doing well are going to do even better, and those who are struggling are going to struggle even more. I've lived in Burbank for decades now, and I've seen times when my neighbors were working 52 weeks a year, and then 50, and then 40, and then 30, and then barely struggling to survive. I've seen them pack up and move to Canada for months at a time, or New Zealand, or Great Britain, and this will just accelerate that trend. Laura Friedman, who represents this area in the House, and I wrote to David Ellison to ask what kind of promises, what kind of commitments he would make in terms of theatrical production. And while there was a promise of so many movies per year, there was no promise about where those movies would be made or where that production would take place. So I'm deeply concerned with the impact on the workforce. I am also deeply concerned with the impact on media freedom. And here we've already seen such disturbing indications of the loss of media freedom, things that I never would have imagined seeing in this country. We had two networks, ABC and CBS, extorted by the president, who filed frivolous lawsuits against them, with the threat that if they didn't comply, if they didn't not just pay the government, that would be bad enough, but pay him personally, then he would not allow a merger to go forward, or he would interfere with their other unrelated business activities. We've seen the change in the Washington Post editorial policy for the same reason. We've seen a change in the LA Times editorial policy for the same reason. And of course, this takes place in the context of attacks on academic freedom in universities, attacks on law firms and who they can represent. This is part of a broader story, the story David, that you have been telling. So let me ask you, Ms. Fang, if you can elaborate further on what this will signal to other media companies. Harvard has stood up against the attack on universities. If Harvard had capitulated, all of the others would have decided, well, if Harvard, with all of its resources, can't stand up for academic independence, then how can we? How are the media organizations left feeling now that ABC and CBS have capitulated, that CNN may capitulate? Where does that leave the rest of the organizations that don't have anywhere near those kind of resources?
Yeah, so I have had the privilege in my career of wearing two different hats, being a trial lawyer and also now being in the media. And I will tell you that the big law firms that capitulated last year, that bent the knee first, really set the tone for everything that happened subsequently. Because if they, who know the laws, who know the courtrooms, who know the system, didn't have the courage to stand up and they had the financial wherewithal to be able to withstand an attack from this administration, then it sent the message to everyone else that we wouldn't be able to do it. We've seen in real time, it's not fiction, it's fact. We're seeing in real time what's happened when you look at CBS, right? And you talked about those settlements, 16 million with CBS, 15 million with ABC, and those were frivolous is a generous adjective, Senator, I would use for those lawsuits as a trial lawyer, okay? And those were pay to play. And that money went to a presidential library for a man who doesn't read. And so it's extortionate in reality. And unfortunately, you don't have a Department of Justice in this administration that will stand up to it. In fact, we just got the verdict today that Ticketmaster Live Nation was illegally having this monopoly on the entertainment industry when it comes to ticketing. But it wasn't the Trump DOJ that carried it across the finish line. It was the state attorneys general. I mean, you have an amazing one in California, an Attorney General, Rob Bonta, who's also fighting concerning this merger and Nexstar Tegna. Journalistic integrity, editorial independence, that ends up going the wayside and going into the rubbish in order to be able to have access to people. But then you have no editorial independence from the top down, and then you have self-censorship. As a journalist, you're worried, can I do the story? If I do it, is my producer gonna kill it because somebody higher up said you can't do it? And then you see this cozying up of special intimate dinners with Donald Trump and the invitation to Secretary Hegseth and Stephen Miller, of all people, to sit at your table at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. That is way too cozy to be comfortable. And that sends a message to the rest of the world. I mean, I am young enough to have grown up with what I call the holy trinity of broadcast journalism, CBS, ABC, NBC. And when you see these major companies bend a knee, you get more than concerned about it as a journalist. You say to yourself, where am I going to find respite to be able to provide the truth? 1/3 of voters get their information about elections from the news. And we're in a critical midterm year, let alone coming up to 28. Where are people supposed to get their true facts when you end up with a place like CBS that kills stories because they're critical of this administration? And so that is the chilling effect that we see in reality and not just in the ether and a conversation. We see it happening in real time.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I want to, again, tell you how much I appreciate your holding this hearing. It is very notable, Mr. Ruffalo, as you pointed out, that there's only one party represented here, that none of the chairs or subcommittee chairs are going to hold a hearing on this. It is not, I think, unrelated to the fact that in another realm, there's no willingness of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to have even a single open hearing on the war in Iran. This is a majority that believes that if you hide, maybe you can avoid accountability, but there is no hiding right now. I think our democracy is very much at stake. Certainly our economy and our way of life is very much at risk, and I think this merger is a great metaphor, not only for what's happened to other industries, but also what's happening to our democracy, and I thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator. I'm now honored to turn to Congressman Jamie Raskin.
Thank you, Chairman Booker, for putting together this absolutely essential hearing. It's great to be with Senator Schiff, my former colleague from the House and my former co-impeachment manager when we came around the second time in the second of 2 Trump impeachments. And you know, Trump has 50% of all the presidential impeachments in American history. who knows where the future goes, you know. So thank you. It's great to be with you with a great field screenwriter. You shouldn't feel bad, but I think over the weekend, the White House tweeted out that I was a stupid person's idea of a smart person. So I replied that, you know, I thought they were a smart person's idea of a stupid person. But thank you, Chairman Booker, for putting this together. Ms. Fang, I wanted to start with you because you make an excellent point when you say we're seeing the corruption of journalistic integrity, editorial independence. I would add substantive antitrust review, and also the character of the Department of Justice as an instrument of the rule of law as opposed to an instrument of political corruption. You stated that you may face reprisal just for speaking up about this right now. You noted that already Paramount has pulled the ads from the Ankler after its chief was spotted wearing a block the merger button. Tell me how these threats of retribution affect freedom of expression and what it's like existentially to be reporting the news under these circumstances.
Well, you have you're a moving target in this administration if you speak out critically against this regime. You are always in the line of fire, whether you are in mainstream media or if you're in independent journalism. I spoke of the chilling effect, but the biggest fear is the self-censorship of being worried that something's going to happen to you, either literally. I mean, I have received death threats as a result of the reporting that I have done on Donald Trump, or that you are not going to be able to successfully carry a story into the public sphere for consumption by the American people because the story gets killed before it can actually see the light of day. So when you see these big companies, especially the ones that have the ability to defend their reporters, when you see these big companies that have the ability to say, no, Mr. President, I am not going to do it the way that you want to do it. I mean, when you see them say, okay, fine, thank you, sir, may I have another? That sends a very definitive message that we're on our own. And again, it's amazing because with my esteemed colleagues that are here with me today, we don't operate alone when we produce even TV news reporting, right? We have producers and we have writers and we have other people that are part of this journey.
Yeah.
And even they are facing the guillotine when it comes to their employment if we're not to be able to do our jobs that way.
But what's interesting is it's the people who stand up for their rights and act in a defiant way who are surviving. It's the people who crumble before Donald Trump who end up losing professional self-respect and esteem. I mean, look what's happened with the law firms. It's the law firms who stood up to Trump, who won in court on their First Amendment rights, the right not to be banned by the government, not to be excluded from federal courthouses and from federal buildings. And it's the ones who caved in who I think look terrible today. It's the same thing with the colleges and the universities. But admittedly, this is an ongoing daily fight. And I want to thank you for standing up and being outspoken about this. Mr. Chairman, 2 months ago, the head of the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division, Gail Slater, was forced out by the White House. And prior to her ouster, her deputies were fired for either alleged insubordination against the administration or they voluntarily left their jobs because it had simply become impossible to render objective antitrust advice and review in such a politically charged and corrupt atmosphere. One of the principled enforcers who was forced out of DOJ, Roger Alford, bravely spoke out to our committee at the invitation of the Democratic minority in December about the pervasive pay-to-play corruption now saturating the Department of Justice under Trump. And Alford served in the Antitrust Division during both the first and second Trump administrations and was a Trump appointee. But he testified to, quote, the pervasive practice of lobbyists attempting to corruptly influence antitrust law enforcement. He told us that corporate lobbyists now boast of their ability to overrule both the professional antitrust experts at DOJ and even President Trump's own handpicked leadership at the Antitrust Division. In other words, even Trump's own handpicked leaders are not corrupt enough for the people who want to be able to run the Department of Justice themselves in antitrust review. Professor Alford gave a detailed description of what he called the HPE Juniper merger scandal. He He told us that on numerous occasions, in a variety of matters, we implored our superiors and lawyers on the other side to call off the jackals, but to no avail. Today, cases are being resolved based on political connections and not on their legal merits. And I wonder, I don't know, perhaps Ms. Verheyden-Hilliard, you could address this. What does this mean in terms of antitrust law and antitrust policy, that we have a whole series of processes, a whole series of personnel, and a whole series of decisions that are overrun by pay-to-play money corruption?
We're witnessing what we have right now is a sort of dual track of an aggressive effort to remake American society. So we have the kleptocracy, we have the antitrust violations, we have a Justice Department that is being used purely as a political weapon to crush those that would dare stand up to this administration or express dissent. And that is an effort to really remake American society. And we have to recognize this for what it is. That when you have the Justice Department, that is targeting people, that is engaged in vindictive prosecutions, that is simultaneously now asking, in fact, to wipe away the seditious conspiracy convictions of people that stormed this entity in an insurrection, and meanwhile are trying to, under the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM 7, are now targeting dissent in the United States with this bogus fantasy that there is like an Antifa organization that everyone knows doesn't exist. And that is all part of this effort with the media consolidation to turn and crush any type of opposition. And why is the speed so fast? The speed is so fast for a reason that actually we can take heart in. And that is because right now, the majority sentiment of the people of the United States don't agree with this direction. The majority sentiment of the people of the United States want to live in a different society, one where maybe they don't agree with their neighbors, but they don't want to see their neighbors go to jail because they have a difference of opinion.
Well, and that's why the Hungarian example is so powerful and instructive for us, because a lot of people were saying we will never dig our way out of this fascism. We will never be able to overthrow the authoritarian clampdown on the rule of law within the government. And the people of Hungary showed that you can do it. Especially a lot of the young people of Hungary came to the fore and led that fight. But Senator Booker, the FCC is in the exact same place that the FTC is and the Department of Justice Antitrust Division is. Look at the previous acquisition made by the same company that we're discussing today, Paramount, okay? So last year, Paramount engaged in a thoroughly corrupt process to acquire Skydance, and it worked for them. In late 2024, incoming FCC Commissioner Brandon Carr took 2 tickets worth $12,000 to attend the gala at the Kennedy Center. Of course, that was just a modest down payment on the corruption to come. The donor of the tickets was Paramount, whose proposed merger with Skydance was about to require Commissioner Carr's approval. At the gala, Commissioner Carr pulled his hosts aside reportedly and gave them some advice. Paramount owned CBS News. President Trump had sued CBS News for $10 billion in damages, a number he apparently likes because he's suing the IRS for $10 billion today too. But he was suing CBS for $10 billion because he didn't like the way that they had edited an interview with Kamala Harris. I mean, I don't like the way that Fox News edits the interviews with Donald Trump, but I can't sue them for $10 billion and extract some money from somebody because of it. Now, according to multiple reports, Commissioner Carr told the Paramount executives that the grudge which Trump harbored against CBS would make review of the merger much tougher than anticipated, and they might need to make some concessions to the president to get him to approve the deal. So Commissioner Carr proceeded to sit on the proposed merger for months so that President Trump could extract extraordinary benefits from the companies in exchange for approval of the merger. What did they get? Well, he got a $16 million contribution to his presidential library. He got millions of dollars more in a promise of free advertising. He got a promise to install a Trump-friendly spy or minder in the CBS newsroom. and the cancellation of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Only then did Commissioner Carr permit the merger to proceed. That is unbelievable that took place in a free democracy. That is like Putin's Russia. That is like Orban's Hungary. And we're going to have the same kind of political transformation of America to overthrow this corruption and this authoritarianism that has descended upon our government. Well, let me ask you, perhaps, Professor Borenstein, if I could. This kind of merger review has got nothing to do with antitrust law, right? It's got nothing to do with consumer choice or lower prices or better news. It's just corruption, isn't it? Or perhaps I should ask Mr. Isaac. I'm sorry I missed your opening statement, but yeah.
I mean, I can speak from the perspective of my own industry. You know, I've been asked, I'm a documentary filmmaker, I've been asked how this might affect the future of my industry. And in many ways, you can see right now the most grotesque example of what might come, the most extreme example, just by opening Amazon and streaming the documentary Melania. This is a documentary that looks straight out of Chinese Central Television. I spent 10 years working in China. I don't think I've ever seen anything as grotesque as this. And to your point, this reeks of corruption. The budget of this film, $40 million, could have made my recent Oscar-winning film 50 times over. You don't need that amount of money to make a documentary film. So what was all of that money for? I think
how much did your film cost to make?
$800,000. So this $40 million, I don't know where exactly all of it went, but for all intents and purposes, it has the appearance of a bribe.
Well, let's see, Mr. Ruffalo, let me ask you just about the shakedown politics of the Trump administration when it comes to antitrust merger review or FCC licenses. How well is that understood in your industry, what's taking place? And is there a compulsion that people feel to work on the side of the Trump administration, or else you're on your own?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I will tell you this, that we just passed the 3,000 mark of signers on this letter just while we've been doing this hearing. That's 3,000 people who saw the Fox merger and the disaster that caused our community and understand what these trusts mean. And so everyone, I think, understands the level of corruption that's happening here. I mean, let's face it, this deal we wouldn't even be here talking about this if we had a DOJ that actually was operating the way it was meant to operate. And we all have seen what happened with CBS. We see the threats that are happening to Jimmy Kimmel. We saw what happened to Stephen Colbert. These are beloved personalities, and this is clearly the FCC using its power, totally politicized, to destroy our freedoms of speech. That's the understanding that people have. Are they moving to work for Trump? Sure, I'm sure people are. There's people who have families to feed, who have mortgages, who are in impossible positions. The 3,000 people who signed this letter are either there because they can afford to be there, or they're there because they can't afford to not be there.
Well, I appreciate that much. In democracy, the government is supposed to be an instrument for the common good of all the people. They've turned the government into an instrument for private self-enrichment of the guy who gets in and his family and his friends. And you have to feather his nest if you want to get just basic delivery of goods or a fair hearing before the government. That's not democracy, that is authoritarianism. And I'll close finally with a question for you, Senator Booker, which is, why are we forced to have shadow hearings on an issue of such central importance to the American people. Why is this not taking place either in the Senate or the House? When Netflix was the proposed buyer of Warner Bros. Discovery, Senator Lee and Representative Fitzgerald were both eager to conduct hearings. But now that Paramount is the only bidder remaining, we don't hear a peep from them. And we're forced into the side rooms and to construct these hearings of our own, which they boycott.
Our government is based on this idea of checks and balances. We know that the functioning of our democracy is utterly dependent upon having an executive who, when they overstep their power, as the founders saw, that you have a Congress that is willing to check that power and hold them accountable, offer transparency, accountability, and more. The fact that we haven't had hearings on this, the most significant merger in the media world, perhaps of my lifetime, or even the ongoing war, is unconscionable. And the complicity of our Republican colleagues who control the House and the Senate right now is enabling things like this to happen. It's not just what the president is doing that's bad here. It is what the enablers of that president is ultimately undermining our democracy. I'm grateful for you, sir.
Well, and I'm grateful for your leadership here. It's not just an evasion and a betrayal by our colleagues who are not doing this. It's also humiliating for them because we've got the power to declare war, not Donald Trump and not J.D. Vance and not Tulsi Gabbard and their Signal chat group. We're the ones who regulate the economy and commerce in America, not the president. His job is very simple: to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, not twisted, not distorted, not impounded, not reversed. And so our colleagues are not just failing in oversight, they're failing in the basic job of legislating, because these are our responsibilities. And I yield back to you, and I thank you for inviting me to come over, Chairman Booker.
It is extraordinary that you are here. I now have the pleasure of bringing on the next senator who is extraordinary in this space, as well as in fighting to preserve our democracy, Senator Hirono from Hawaii. Thank you. Thank you again, Jamie Raskin.
Thank you very much. It's always fun to listen to both of you gentlemen. So it's great to see the panel, and especially my friend Katie. How are you? Hanging in there, right? Antitrust is very complicated, and I used to do a bit of antitrust law myself, so I know. But the good news relating to, I know it was announced about the Ticketmaster situation, but that is, of course, no thanks to the DOJ, which is not an independent body at all. Just about every administrative entity is not independent in the Trump regime, and call it a regime because of its authoritarianism. And so thanks to the states who pursued the Ticketmaster situation, and thanks to a jury who said this is a monopoly, and now we're going into the remedy phase. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I did want to congratulate Mr. Borenstein for your Academy Award. I'm looking forward to seeing your feature. Thank you. So, one of the things that's happening is that with this kind of massive merger, the voices of diversity and the opportunities for the diverse voices and stories to be told become very much, I think, decreased and challenged. And I'd like to ask Katie, Ms. Phang, to talk a little bit more about your own experiences with regard to diversity, which, by the way, this administration, this regime is very eager to stamp out.
Well, they've made DEI a bad word, right? And that has become a mission to eliminate DEI. We saw it explicitly at CBS News after we had that extortionate settlement payment of $16 million. The installation of a, quote, ombudsman was pretty much to eliminate any type of viewpoint opposition or viewpoint diversity from what was being done at CBS. As a proud child of immigrants, a Korean American first generation, I can tell you that if you end up having one note, one messaging, because there is an absolute crush of control and power because of this mega merger going through, then everything is just going to have one flavor, and it's going to be boring, and there'll be a lack of creativity, and there'll be a lack of the independence to be able to pursue stories that reflect the fabric of our American society. The other thing I wanted to point out is the following. I have a deep-seated interest in wanting to know about the $24 billion that is going towards this $110 billion deal that's coming from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. I find it to be fascinating that the way that this is being structured is to avoid governmental scrutiny. To me, as a former prosecutor, that means that there's something to be hidden, that they don't want it to be transparent. As an independent journalist, I can pursue that. I can chase down that information. I can reveal it to the American people so that they understand what's at stake for this merger. If I was working at a mainstream legacy media outlet like maybe CBS, you're not going to see it on 60 Minutes. You're not going to see it covered in any way because that's not going to be allowed. That is the refreshing thing about being an independent journalist, but at the same time, I feel for my colleagues that still remain in mainstream media because it's the self-censorship that I've spoken of earlier, but it's also from the top down censorship that happens when things just don't get reported because there is a fear. You know how they have that saying at the New York Times, report without fear or favor? They now report, not the New York Times per se, but you're going to see a lot of reporters in media industries, they report in fear to curry favor. And that's the biggest concern that I have about this merger.
Well, the $16 million paid by Paramount, that is so overt. It's called, I would call it extortion. And it's the awesome thing about this regime is that everything is so overt. Their corruption is right out there for us to see. So my question to all of you is that what can we do when we have, as Corey mentioned, when we don't have checks and balances? We can have these spotlight hearings. At least we can do that, and it's streamed, right?
Yes.
Stream. The communicating to the American public, that's something we can do, but nonetheless, what do you think is going to happen to this merger request?
Is that to me, Senator?
Any of you?
I'm happy to defer to other people that maybe want to speak on it a little bit more.
I'll be brief, but I will say that, one, people can speak up. People have a voice. People can listen, and the louder that there are events like this happen to shed light on this, the more people can see the consequences of a merger for their own lives and in terms of their own cost. Second is that the legal tools exist for those who have the courage to follow the law and are guided by them. We certainly wish that there was more action from the Department of Justice, but there are state AGs who have a role to play as well, and we think it's vital that they do. We think that and this may be self-serving, but there is a role to play for unions to play in these types of arrangements because, for example, CBS eliminated at an act of what we believe is total capitulation its race and culture unit, which was intended to ensure diversity of viewpoints in its news. While we have diversity language in our collective bargaining agreements that cannot be so easily eliminated, we think there's a role to play for that as well.
Do you think that public outcry regarding this potential merger would help? Because I don't think there is very much public outcry or awareness of what is happening.
Ruffalo raised his hand.
I'd like to
I'm
address
sorry, go
that.
ahead, Mark.
We, in my community, in the filmmaking community, we've made this sign-on letter, and within 4 days, we had from 1,000 signatures. Today, we just passed 3,000 signatures. This is the deepest sort of bench of Hollywood talent. We have probably, I know, over 10 Academy Award winners who have signed on. We have artists who are both working within Paramount and within Warner Brothers now. And it's only growing. blockthemerger.com is the vehicle that is carrying this letter. And, what we've all seen is capitulation leads to degradation. And anyone who capitulates to these corrupt forces gets degraded. And I think we all understand that. We've learned that lesson. We've seen it happen at CBS. We've seen it happen at universities. We've seen it happen in a countless number of industries right now, law firms. And we know we have to fight. Mm-hmm. But the only way we're powerful is if we fight together. And I can tell you this, that the AGs, after seeing these 3,000 signatures of some of the greatest talent that Hollywood and the world has to offer in media, means something to them and will motivate them. And I hope will help give you what you need and the cover you need to be strong in the halls of Congress as our partners. The people lead. The people always lead. And that's what we're doing. And we're looking for partners in our agencies. We're looking for partners in our unions. We're looking for partners in the ancillary unions. And we're looking for partners in consumers who are the ones who are going to pay the highest price. And our brothers and sisters of working class people who are going to lose their jobs, their homes, not be able to buy health care, send their kids to college. So it has to happen with the people, and it is happening, Senator.
Well, I agree, and the people in Hungary gave me tremendous hope. But the people have to turn out in masses because Trump is going to do the same kinds of things that Orban was doing in Hungary, which is to interfere with free and fair elections. And Trump is doing everything he can right now to make sure that as far as he can to really stifle our ability to vote by having his former attorney general sue states for their voter rolls. What business does the federal government have getting the information of millions and millions of voters and insisting that the Senate pass the law that would require all of us, millions and millions of us, to re-register to vote with and to produce our birth certificates or passports, and millions of people don't have that, not to mention the women, mainly women, who have taken their spouses' names and that does not match their birth certificates. So all of these kinds of efforts on his part to stifle our votes will require everybody to come out in droves. So the No Kings rallies, those help. But I agree with you, Mark, that it is the people and that we're going to need to mobilize everybody to not just fight this battle, but just about everything else that this regime is doing to stifle our voices and censor what we know and have access to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Radically resistant in ways that none of us had ever thought we would ever need to be when any of us set out on the career journey that we've set out on. And that's just what it's going to take.
Senator Hirono, thank you so much. I know how it demands on your time, and obviously prioritizing this sends a signal, so thank you very much. I'm going to jump in for the speed round at the end, if you all don't mind. And Ms. Fang, you actually put your finger on something that I think is a much bigger deal, which is the foreign investment that we're seeing here that seems to be not talked about enough. And it should be triggering a higher level of scrutiny to a deal that's being sent through. So specifically, this transaction is financed in part by approximately $24 billion from Gulf sovereign wealth funds. What kind of concerns does that raise for you, and national security concerns does that raise to you about the kind of shaping of our news content as well as our relationships abroad?
Yeah, so that $24 billion is coming from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi, right? We already have a $400 million jet that was given to this president, courtesy of Qatar. We're in the midst of a war, right? And people want to know what is happening. And so, for example, CNN International, 321 million people access CNN International. If you end up having the Ellisons taking this over and they're controlling what is being disseminated even internationally, then that is going to be the undue influence by other nations, foreign countries, foreign nations, on how that messaging is being shaped, how the narrative is being driven. It's going to take what Trump is using to justify his global march. He's now threatening places like Cuba next. He is putting his eyes on the prize outside of us domestically. And if you have something like CNN International that's being controlled by an Ellison family that is beholden to the Trump regime, then you end up having just that particular narrative being peddled and pumped out to 321 million people internationally. That is a legitimate concern. I'm also concerned because we're not always aligned. with nations that have interests in our business. And it's not a coincidence that the Trump family has all of this business with Saudi Arabia as well. But our intelligence community, when it wasn't run by Trump, found that MBS directed the murder of Jamal Khashoggi at the Washington Post because he was speaking out about the atrocities he was witnessing in that country. That is not a coincidence that somebody who decided to take free speech and use it the right way to educate people as to the atrocities that are happening over there, that he ended up murdered. And yet we're willing to take billions of dollars to be able to fund this deal. It doesn't make any sense. And it creates a debt load, which ends up being a debt that is owed. So how are you going to pay it back? What are you going to do to be able to pay that money back? And that is the concern that I have.
Well, let's string for me for a second about the debt load. Would you talk about that on this deal?
Well, I mean, the debt load, this is a $110 billion deal. How is it being financed? Why are you not willing to sit here, David Ellison, and sustain the scrutiny by the United States Senate as to how this deal is going to be managed? At this point, I'm focusing on I didn't even mention the $1 billion from Tencent Holdings from China. That's a part of the surveillance state in China that is a part of this deal as well. It is intentionally being structured. The debt in this deal is being structured in a way to evade government scrutiny. That in and of itself should force everybody in the United States Senate, especially on the GOP side, to sit there and say, well, America first should really be America first. If it's America first, then somebody should be willing to answer these questions, and they're not, which raises more questions, and there's no answers coming from the Ellisons.
And a statement just on top of that, it's a pattern now we're seeing. We're seeing a White House that, besides an airplane from Qatar, that literally within days of being inaugurated is doing deals, creating crypto coins and schemes through
World Liberty Financial.
Getting billions of dollars in personal wealth from these Gulf area countries in a way that is then gives, I would say, improper influence on decisions that the president has to make every day on arms sales or sales of chips and other things like that. It is a corrupting, and this seems to be just part and parcel of that. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to jump now to Ms. Verheyden-Hilliard. I'm so grateful that you're here, and I really want to talk about, just really quickly, some of the First Amendment concerns. But can we stick with the international for a second and perhaps talk about the fact that CNN International, which is available in 321 million households and is distributed to 200 different countries. What does that mean for the United States globally if the news is influenced by who's in power and what we project externally as well?
Well, the importance and the essential element of news in a democracy is, right, not just that sort of we know what's going on so we can talk about it at the water cooler because we just want to be informed. It's because if we don't know what our government is up to, we can't fight and argue to change what our government is up to. So when you have an administration that is waging an illegal war without the consent of the people, and the vast majority of people truthfully, what is actually happening on an international scale, then all we're left with is whatever an administration wants us to know. And if we're not informed, we can't organize and we can't fight. And as Mark said, that's the essential element, is people organized, mobilized. That's how all changes happen in this country.
And so that is actually, people think about the First Amendment, they think about government's infringement or government censorship. This is still a First Amendment issue, though, correct? When you have corporate concentration in this kind of way, how is that, so people understand who are watching, how is that a direct assault on the First Amendment rights of all Americans?
The First Amendment restricts the ability of the government to repress, suppress our freedom of speech. That is the essential function. And while private parties certainly have an ability to control what they want to say, when you have a government interfering and using private entities as a proxy force for government suppression of speech, you have a First Amendment problem, and that is what we have right now. This government is openly and repeatedly saying that it is directing, interfering, and using these private entities as a proxy force to carry out their ideological agenda.
That's amazing. If you want to just drop your microphone at that moment, you can drop the mic. I'm sure it'll be repaired. Mr. Isaac, let's get into some of the details. Last year, Skydance bought Paramount. Your union expressed very strongly the similar concerns to that merger. So we have history, we have precedent to the moment that we're in right now. What conditions did you ask for in that merger? And now, having seen what that was happened, how is that making you reflect now on the threat that we're seeing?
I think that it would be a mistake to rely upon dubious promises by this proposed merger based on the experience that we've seen with the Skydance deal. We, along with other unions, raised grave concerns about job losses were Skydance to acquire Paramount. The response was really a dismissal of the idea. It was brushed aside as an exaggerated threat, and we were told that no, the additional capital would in fact expand job opportunities. Well, we know how that turned out. The job losses were severe, they were immediate, and they're ongoing. We have no assurance that the wave of layoffs is over. We hear promises that, well, there'll be an increase in film screenings, that there will be more films in theaters were this merger to take place. Again, a dubious promise, given that the number that is being bandied about, 30 films, is more than either of these studios produces. And we know that producers are very loath to compete against their own releases. I think that it's important to look to the history of media consolidation to know what the future will be like and not be misled by a lot of false promises.
Thank you very much. My Academy Award-winning friend, there's an argument that is made in defense of consolidation that is stunning to me, that the real problem is not ownership concentration, some people say this, but audience demand, that political documentaries and films about social issues are too difficult to sell. This is the pushback that you might hear. But your own work is really contrary to that, with other recent documentary successes. In fact, what I've seen in the last 20 years is how documentaries actually have extraordinary success that often hitting nerves in society, fault lines that are really valuable to be pointing to. But the problem really has to do about financing, distribution, and access to audiences, which are often controlled by people that might have different views than a documentary might be expressing. So in your view, is it really market demand that is limiting political and social documentaries, or is it the fact that a few powerful gatekeepers decide what gets financed and distributed? What is it? Or is it a combination of both? Could you give your experience?
Thank you for that question, Senator. So I think a few times throughout this, we've mentioned my latest film, which did not find a home on U.S. streaming. We've mentioned No Other Land, the Academy Award winner from last year, which did not find a home on U.S. streaming. We've mentioned my good friend's film, Holding Liat, the Berlin Film Festival winner, which did not find U.S. streaming. What all of these have in common is they found successful platforms through their own hard work. What they did was they did grassroots screenings. They did theatrical releases throughout America. They self-distributed. And at the end, all of these films ended up making decent money. No Other Land probably made more money than they would have made had they made a sale to the streamer. And this is through their own hard work of doing self-distribution, and they don't even have any of the reach and any of the power that a Netflix or that a big streamer might have. They had to learn themselves how to self-distribute, and yet they still made a pretty good income. What I've seen through doing grassroots screenings around America is that there is an incredible demand. There are communities everywhere that are looking for filmmakers that connect their struggles to stories so that they can contextualize what they're doing, so that they can be inspired, and so that they can build chains of equivalences between their own struggles and other people's. There's tremendous demand, and I see that through successful self-distribution strategies all around me. So no, it's not because of demand, it's rather because of media consolidation. It is more convenient to have a prepackaged homogeneous product that you can accurately predict. When funders put in money in a consolidated system, they want to know exactly what they're getting. They don't want any risk, whether it's from creative decisions, whether it's from potentially politically sensitive topics and people that they might offend. And because of that, they're just avoiding the most innovative and interesting films and sensitive films. I think what you're going to see if this consolidation continues really is more people like me. Because I've been touring with my last few films around the world. And you know, when you're touring at film festivals, after the name of your film in programs, there's parentheses. What country is it from? And I'm an American filmmaker, but my films have been financed in Denmark and recently Czech Republic. And it hurts me to see it. It hurts me to know that I'm not representing America. It hurts me to know after the Academy Awards, Europe was celebrating our film as proof that the European model works. It's a model of many small funders coming together, not one with really so much power. We had, I think, 10 to 15 different small institutional funders in Europe come together to fund our project. And when we were, after the Academy Awards, they were celebrating us as some sort of proof that Europe works. I would love to see America work in the same way.
Mark, I want to ask my final question to you because for me, this is very, very personal. My dad, in his small mountain southern segregated town, was in a balcony for blacks only as a little boy and watched a movie that was about a place called Manhattan that it looked like a different planet to him, where the skyscrapers, but it was all about a salesman, he told me, that was getting by on his wit and his charisma and made a life for himself. And it was a world my dad could never even think would be reality one day for a black boy like him in the 1940s. But within 35 years, he is a salesman in Manhattan working for a small tech firm called IBM and living an entirely radically different life. It's almost as if art saw it first so that he could plant a seed for him to make it real. And that's the thing about art. It has a way of expanding the moral imagination of the world, of connecting people who suddenly don't feel isolated and alone. I think of the art that has served to expose environmental injustice, the art that has helped to show the humanity of LGBTQ Americans when there were laws denying them that very humanity. I think of myself as a little boy growing up now in an affluent town where we're the only black family, and history being so important to my parents that suddenly my classmates were seeing on the TV screen books that my mom made me read, like when you're about my age, all watch Roots, and the whole country saw black people on the screen and the brilliance and the beauty and the hearts and minds that opened up. And at a time that we see government actively banning books, we see government actively trying to erase our history or sanitize and homogenize it, at a time that government seems to want to suppress voices, art is vital for liberation. Art is vital to sustain us in hardship. And ultimately, I hope art creates the pathways for us to become a better nation, because Lord knows we're still evolving towards that more perfect union. And so I ask you in the final witness testimony of this hearing, for you as a person who is every day is a creator and trying to challenge that moral imagination, for the little boy or little girl that is 2026's version of my dad in the 1940s, why is this to you, of all the things going on in America right now, why is this and the threat it might have to creators and what gets created and artists' voices and artists' opportunities to challenge, to defy, to inspire, why is it so important for you, this cause that's brought you virtually here to this hearing?
That's a beautiful question, beautifully framed. I really appreciate it, and I know the power of art it has had for me. This is a 5,000-year-old tradition. This goes back to the Greeks. This goes back to the very core of mankind's need to understand the world that we're living in. And it's how we understand each other. My
My acting teacher, Stella Adler, used to say, you should have to pay to go to church and the theater should be free because that's where you learned how to be a human being, darling. And that's true. It's our stories that we tell each other that connect us to each other and our humanity. It transcends politics. It transcends ideologies. And it's what shapes our understanding of the world. And it has to be free. It has to be able to come from some deep part inside of the actor, the artist, that needs to be spoken to the world, that is unique to that human being's experience, so that it can resonate in a universal way from the individual to the collective. That's why these stories make us better, make us more deeply feeling, make us be able to see ourselves bigger than the lives that we've been born into, the lives that our economics have put us into, our education, our disabilities, and allows us to transcend the cage of fate. That's why it's so important. And that's why it has to be free. That's why I'm here testifying. That's why I'm here with my fellows next to me. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's very, very beautiful. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I want to thank everybody who's watching virtually. I want to thank my colleagues who all came amidst a day that's pulling us in all different directions. This is about so much. It's fundamentally about, will the Congress of the United States of America do its job? Will we hold hearings? Will we have deliberation? Will we have debate? Will we have accountability? Will we have checks and balances? I think our democracy is seeing such peril because we haven't been doing those things. And we've been allowing a president to get drunk with power and push and push and push. And he's breaking things that aren't going to be easily repaired. This merger threatens so much when it comes to jobs, when it comes to costs for consumers. It threatens so much when it comes to free speech and freedom to access news. And perhaps what Mark was saying, most threatening of all, is it threatens the magic that is art, the ability not to make numbers add up, but art is where 1 + 1 becomes 3 or 100 or 1,000. Art is alchemy. It's the magic that has sustained humanity since we were all around a campfire listening to stories millennia ago. This is really important. Art is at the center of every aspect of humanity, and the heroes that have inspired us, the nobleness and decency of humanity, the connection that we all should be striving for, all of that is made colder and darker when consolidated forces limit the art that can be expressed. So I am thankful. We have work to do. I'm thankful for the activism of everybody's here. My staff, with the staffs of other senators, with some extraordinary people that are in this audience, were the people that were able to pull this together, and I want to give them my deep gratitude and thanks. We will obviously be elevating this content. We will be obviously elevating the testimony online. Many of the senators are going to push it out on their platforms. I hope you do as well. I am still a prisoner of hope that is difficult and dark as this moment seems. Somehow the human spirit triumphs over adversity, and I hope that we can triumph in this case as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Yeah. Maisie, would you stand behind everybody and Mark to take a picture? Mark, we'll stay on the screen. We want to get a picture, Mark.
Yes.
I mean,